far beyond the busy trade routes of human space. A small salvage ship called Iron Star moved slowly through a field of broken metal and drifting debris. The crew had spent weeks searching abandoned ships for valuable parts. Most days were boring: old engines, damaged cargo containers, rusting pieces of forgotten stations. Nothing exciting ever happened. That was why everyone became nervous when the scanners detected something unusual. A massive object floated ahead in the darkness. It was far larger than any normal cargo ship. Its surface was covered with strange alien symbols. Large sections of its hull had been torn apart by explosions. The ship looked dead, but one thing confused the crew. A faint power signal was still coming from somewhere inside. Captain Ross stared at the scanner screen. "That ship should not have power after all these years," he said quietly. Nobody answered. Even the experienced crew members felt uneasy. The vessel looked ancient, like something that had been lost for a very long time. Still, valuable technology could be hidden inside. The captain finally gave the order. The Iron Star slowly approached the giant wreck. Soon a small boarding team entered through a damaged section of the hull. Among them was Ethan Carter, a human engineer known for fixing almost anything. Unlike the others, Ethan was calm. He carried a repair scanner and moved carefully through the dark corridors. The inside of the ship felt strange. The air was cold. Emergency lights flashed weakly from time to time. Broken machines lined the walls. Many rooms looked like laboratories. Some contained shattered glass chambers. Others held damaged equipment nobody could identify. The deeper the team traveled, the stranger things became. Several crew members noticed claw marks across metal walls. Others found signs of old battles. Something terrible had happened here. Then one of the scanners suddenly beeped. A strong energy reading appeared ahead. Everyone stopped. The signal was coming from behind a giant security door. The door itself was heavily reinforced. Whatever was inside had clearly been important. Or dangerous. The team worked together to force the door open. Metal groaned loudly. Dust filled the air. Finally, the entrance slid aside. The room beyond was unlike anything they had seen before. It was enormous. Rows of broken machines stood silent around the chamber. Thick cables ran across the floor. In the very center stood a single containment pod. Unlike everything else in the room, the pod still had power. Blue lights glowed softly around its surface. Everyone stared at it. The pod looked untouched by time. Captain Ross slowly approached. "What is that?" One crew member whispered. Nobody knew. Ethan stepped closer and activated his scanner. The screen immediately filled with warnings. His eyes widened. The energy levels were unbelievable. Far higher than anything he had ever recorded. For a moment he thought the scanner was broken. Then the glass covering the pod cleared. Everyone froze. Inside was a child. A small alien girl sat curled into a corner. She looked no older than 8 years old. Her silver hair floated gently around her face. Thin glowing lines ran across her skin. Her eyes were closed. She looked peaceful, almost fragile. The room became completely silent. Nobody expected to find a child, especially not inside a military containment chamber. Captain Ross frowned. "This has to be some kind of experiment," he said. One crew member nervously stepped backward. Another stared at the scanner readings. Then his face turned pale. "Captain," he whispered. Ross turned toward him. "What is it?" The crew member swallowed hard. "The energy inside her body is increasing." Everyone immediately looked back at the pod. The scanner numbers continued rising, higher, higher, and higher. Alarms suddenly echoed through the room. Red warning lights flashed across every screen. Unknown symbols appeared on nearby monitors. The old ship seemed to be waking up. Ethan quickly moved toward a control panel. His translator device struggled to understand the alien language. Then several words appeared on his screen. His blood ran cold. "Bioweapon designation. Subject 0." The room erupted with nervous voices. A weapon? That's impossible. She's just a child. But the warnings continued. More information appeared. Threat level, extinction event. Containment priority, maximum. Authorized personnel, none. Captain Ross looked horrified. Even he understood what those words meant, whatever this girl was. The people who created her had feared her. Then something unexpected happened. The girl's eyes slowly opened. Bright silver light filled them. The alarms instantly stopped. The room became silent once more. She looked around in confusion. Like someone waking from a very long sleep, her gaze moved across the frightened crew members. Past the armed guards, past Captain Ross. Then her eyes settled on Ethan. For some reason, she focused only on him. Ethan remained perfectly still. The girl slowly stood inside the pod. Her small hand touched the glass. Fear filled the faces of everyone around her. Nobody knew what she might do next. Then the pod released a soft hiss. The containment locks disengaged. The door began to open. Several crew members raised their weapons. Captain Ross shouted for everyone to stay back. But nobody could take their eyes off the child. The girl stepped out slowly, weakly, as if she could barely stand. She looked directly at Ethan for a moment. The giant laboratory felt completely silent. Then she spoke. Her voice was small, soft, and filled with confusion. "Dad?" No one moved, no one spoke, and deep within the ancient ship, hidden systems suddenly activated once again, as if something had finally awakened after waiting many years. Nobody spoke for several seconds after the alien girl said the word, "Dad?" The giant laboratory remained completely silent. Captain Ross slowly lowered his weapon. Several crew members exchanged nervous looks. None of them understood why the girl had chosen Ethan. They had never met before. Ethan himself looked confused. He took a careful step forward. The small girl did not move away. Instead, she continued staring at him with wide silver eyes, as if she had been searching for him her entire life. Ethan knelt down to avoid looking threatening. "My name is Ethan," he said gently. The girl tilted her head. The name seemed unfamiliar to her. Almost everything seemed unfamiliar. She looked around the room with the curiosity of someone seeing the world for the first time. Bright lights, metal walls, machines, people. Everything caught her attention. Then she suddenly grabbed Ethan's sleeve. The movement was small, but it immediately made several armed crew members tense. Nobody knew what the child could do. The warnings on the scanners were still fresh in everyone's minds. Subject 0, extinction level weapon. Those words were impossible to forget. Yet the girl looked nothing like a weapon. She looked frightened, lost, and very alone. Captain Ross ordered the crew to return to the Iron Star immediately. Nobody argued. The discovery was far too important. Within an hour, the boarding team had left the ancient laboratory behind. The alien girl remained beside Ethan during the entire journey. She refused to let go of his jacket. Every time another crew member approached too closely, she became nervous. But whenever Ethan spoke, she calmed down. The behavior puzzled everyone. Back aboard the Iron Star, the ship's small medical room was prepared for her. Doctors ran basic scans. The results only created more questions. Her biology matched no known species. Several organs appeared unlike anything in galactic records. And the glowing lines beneath her skin seemed connected to enormous amounts of energy. Energy that should not have been possible inside a living body. One doctor finally shook his head. "I have no idea how she is alive." The news spread through the ship quickly. Some crew members feared her. Others felt sorry for her, but nobody understood her. Not even Ethan. That evening, he sat outside the medical room reviewing reports. The girl sat quietly on a bed nearby. She watched everything he did, every movement, every expression. Like a student studying a teacher. After a while, Ethan noticed something strange. The child was staring at a food container on a nearby table. Not touching it, just staring. "Are you hungry?" Ethan asked. The girl blinked. The word seemed unfamiliar. Hungry. She repeated it softly. Hungry? Ethan smiled slightly. He opened the container and offered it to her. The girl examined it carefully, then copied Ethan's movements exactly. When he took a bite, she took a bite. When he chewed, she chewed. The crew watching through the observation window could hardly believe it. The child was learning by imitation, almost like she had never experienced normal life before. As the hours passed, Ethan taught her simple things. How to drink water, how to sit at a table, how to use basic words. The progress was surprisingly fast. Sometimes frighteningly fast. By the end of the night, she had already learned dozens of new words. Meanwhile, deep inside the ship's computer systems, another discovery was being made. The data recovered from the alien laboratory was finally being translated. Scientists worked through thousands of encrypted files. Most were damaged, some were impossible to read. Then one researcher found something unexpected, a training log. The room fell silent as the translation appeared. Subject 0 Development Report Combat. Efficiency 100% emotional development. Failed compassion response. Failed empathy. Response failed weaponization process. Successful. The scientist stared at the screen. A chill ran down his spine. Whoever created the child had not wanted a daughter. They had wanted a perfect weapon. Hours later, while the researchers continued their work, Ethan prepared a temporary room for the girl. The ship was old, the room was small, but it was comfortable. The child walked inside slowly, looking at everything with curiosity. Then her attention settled on the bed. She touched the blanket carefully, almost as if she had never seen one before. Sleep, Ethan explained. The girl repeated the word. Sleep. For the first time. A small smile appeared on her face. It was tiny but real. Ethan felt something strange in that moment. The reports called her a weapon. The scanners called her a threat. But standing here, she looked like nothing more than a child trying to understand the world. Ethan turned toward the door. You'll be safe here. The girl immediately stood up. Fear suddenly appeared in her eyes. She grabbed his sleeve again. Her voice was barely a whisper. Stay? The single word hit harder than Ethan expected. For a moment, he imagined how many years she had spent alone inside that pod. Waiting in darkness, waiting for someone, anyone. Ethan pulled a chair beside the bed. I'll stay for a little while. The girl slowly relaxed. Within minutes, she fell asleep. The glowing lines beneath her skin dimmed softly. The room became peaceful. Ethan watched quietly, unaware that events were already moving far beyond the Iron Star. Far across the galaxy, inside a heavily guarded military command center, a warning signal suddenly appeared on an ancient monitor, a signal that had been silent for years. The officer reading the report froze, his face turned pale. Then he immediately contacted his superiors. Only 4 words appeared on the secure transmission. 3 days passed aboard the Iron Star. For the first time in many years, the alien girl experienced something close to a normal life. She learned new words every day. She learned how to eat with the crew. She learned how to laugh at simple jokes. And she followed Ethan almost everywhere. The crew slowly became less afraid of her. Some even started treating her like an ordinary child. But not everyone felt comfortable. The warning reports still existed. The recovered files still described her as the most dangerous creation ever made. Nobody knew which version was real, the innocent child, or the weapon hidden inside her. Meanwhile, far beyond the ship's location, another vessel moved silently through space. It had no registration number, no visible markings, no official records. The black warship traveled with only one mission: find Subject 0, bring her back. Alive if possible, dead if necessary. Inside the command chamber, a tall alien warrior studied a holographic image of the girl. His name was Varek, one of the deadliest hunters in the galaxy. Even he looked uneasy while reading the mission details. That alone worried his crew. Varric had fought monsters. Pirates, rebel armies, nothing frightened him. But this mission was different, because Varric remembered the stories. The stories whispered by scientists and military leaders years ago. The stories about a child powerful enough to destroy worlds. The stories about Subject Zero. We locate her tonight, Varric ordered. And we do not underestimate her, back aboard the Iron Star. Nobody knew they were being hunted. The ship continued toward the nearest trade station. Captain Ross hoped to hand the girl over to proper authorities. It seemed like the safest choice. Unfortunately, fate had other plans. Late that evening, Ethan sat in the cafeteria with the child. The crew had finally agreed on a name for her. Lyra, the name suited her. It felt warm, human, normal. Everything her past was not. Lyra smiled while attempting to solve a simple puzzle Ethan had given her. She was learning incredibly fast, sometimes too fast. She could remember entire conversations after hearing them only once. She could understand complicated systems within minutes. It was almost impossible. Then suddenly the ship's alarms exploded to life. Red warning lights filled every corridor. Crew members jumped from their seats. Captain Ross's voice echoed through the speakers. Unknown vessel detected. All personnel report to emergency stations immediately. The cafeteria fell silent. Ethan looked toward the nearest screen. His stomach tightened. A large warship had appeared from hyperspace, only a few kilometers away. The vessel was heavily armed, far stronger than the Iron Star. And it was heading directly toward them. Captain Ross immediately opened communication channels. "This is civilian salvage vessel, Iron Star," he said. "State your intentions." No answer came. Instead, the enemy ship accelerated. The silence was more frightening than a threat. Then the first attack arrived. Energy blasts struck the ship's shields. The entire vessel shook violently. Lights flickered, warning sirens screamed. People were thrown from their seats. Lyra grabbed Ethan's arm instantly. Fear filled her silver eyes. Another explosion rocked the ship, this time stronger. The enemy was not interested in negotiations. They had come for something, or someone on the black warship. Varric watched the attack calmly. Scanners had already confirmed the target's location. Subject Zero was aboard, after years of searching. The weapon had finally been found. "Prepare boarding teams," he ordered, minutes later. Dozens of armored soldiers launched toward the Iron Star. The salvage ship fought back as best it could, but the outcome was obvious. The attackers were military professionals. The crew were civilians, one by one. Enemy boarding pods attached themselves to the hull. Metal doors exploded inward. Gunfire echoed through the corridors. Panic spread across the ship. Ethan immediately took Lyra toward the engineering decks. It was one of the safest areas aboard, at least for now. The sounds of battle grew louder behind them. Crew members rushed through hallways. Security teams attempted to slow the invaders. But everyone knew the truth. The attackers were winning. Then something unexpected happened. As Ethan and Lyra reached an intersection, a group of enemy soldiers suddenly appeared ahead. Their weapons were already raised. For a brief second, nobody moved. One soldier activated a scanner. The device instantly identified Lyra. His face turned pale. "Subject Zero," he whispered. The soldiers immediately lowered their weapons, not out of mercy, out of fear. Even trained warriors seemed terrified of her. That reaction confused Ethan. Why would professional soldiers fear a child? Then the lead soldier shouted, "Secure the target." The moment his team advanced, Lyra flinched. Fear flooded her face. Her breathing became rapid. The glowing lines beneath her skin suddenly brightened. At first the light was weak, then stronger, then impossibly bright. The hallway filled with silver energy. Every nearby electronic system began malfunctioning. Lights shattered, screens exploded. Metal walls vibrated violently. Ethan stared in shock. He could feel raw power building around her. Something enormous, something ancient. The soldiers noticed it too. Pure panic appeared in their eyes. One of them screamed, "Get back!" But it was already too late. A wave of silver energy burst outward from Lyra's body. The corridor disappeared inside a flash of blinding light. The shockwave raced through the ship like a storm. Doors ripped from their frames, weapons melted, armor cracked apart. When the light finally faded, silence followed. The soldiers lay unconscious across the hallway. The walls were scorched black. And yet Ethan remained untouched, not a single scratch. As if the energy itself had chosen to protect him. Lyra stood frozen in the center of the destruction. Tears filled her eyes. She looked terrified by what she had done. I, she whispered. Before she could finish, her knees gave out. Ethan caught her before she hit the floor. She was shaking. Like a frightened child after a nightmare. Not like a living weapon, not like a monster. Just a scared little girl, far away, aboard the enemy warship. Alarms suddenly erupted across every console. Varek stared at the sensor reports in disbelief. The energy surge had been detected from thousands of kilometers away. The readings matched the old records perfectly. For years he had hoped the stories were exaggerated. Now he knew the truth. They were not exaggerated at all. They had underestimated her, and for the first time since this mission began. Varek felt something he rarely experienced, fear. Because Subject Zero was far more powerful than anyone had imagined, and she was only beginning to wake up. The damaged corridors of the Iron Star were filled with smoke and flashing emergency lights. Crew members rushed through the ship, helping the injured and repairing critical systems. The attack had ended for now. The enemy boarding teams had been defeated, but nobody felt safe. Because everyone had witnessed the same terrifying thing. The small alien girl called Lyra had released enough power to stop trained soldiers in seconds. And nobody understood how inside the medical bay. Lyra sat quietly on a bed, her head lowered, her hands trembling. She refused to look at anyone every time she remembered the silver explosion. Fear appeared in her eyes. She did not understand what had happened. She only knew people had been hurt. Ethan sat beside her. "You saved us," he said softly. Lyra slowly shook her head. "No." Her voice was barely a whisper. "I broke everything." Ethan looked at the frightened child. For a moment, he forgot the warnings. Forgot the reports, forgot the title Subject Zero. All he saw was a little girl who was afraid of herself. Before he could say anything else, Captain Ross entered the room. His expression was serious. "Ethan, we found something." "What kind of something?" Ethan asked. Ross hesitated. "The laboratory files." Ethan immediately stood. The recovered files had been translating for days. Most contained damaged information, but if new records had appeared, they might finally explain who Lyra really was. A few minutes later, Ethan entered the ship's research room. Several scientists were gathered around a large screen. Nobody looked comfortable. One researcher activated the first file. An old video appeared. The image was blurry. The recording seemed decades old. At first Ethan saw only a laboratory. Cold walls, bright lights, rows of containment chambers. Then he noticed the children, dozens of children, alien children. Each one trapped inside a glass pod. The room fell silent. Nobody expected that. The recording continued. Scientists moved between the chambers while recording data. Most of the children looked weak. Some looked frightened, others barely moved at all. Then the camera stopped in front of one pod. Inside sat a small girl with silver hair. Lyra, she looked much younger, perhaps 6 years old. A label appeared beneath the pod. Subject Zero. The room became completely silent. Ethan stared at the screen. His stomach tightened. The next file began automatically. This time the recording showed experiments. The scientists were testing the children. Energy tests, mental tests, combat simulations. Again and again, day after day, the children were never treated like people. Only like tools, only like experiments. Then another report appeared. Project Ascension Objective. Create the ultimate living weapon. A scientist began speaking in the recording. Our previous subjects have failed. The emotional response remains too strong. Compassion continues reducing combat efficiency. We must remove empathy completely. Several crew members looked away. The words felt wrong, cold, cruel, heartless. The scientist continued. Subject 0 remains our most successful creation. Her power continues increasing beyond projections. Once emotional functions are eliminated, she will become the perfect weapon. Ethan clenched his fists. The child sleeping in the medical bay had never been treated like a child. She had been raised inside a laboratory, surrounded by machines. Surrounded by people who saw her as equipment, not family, not a daughter. Not even a person, just a weapon. Then another file appeared. This one carried a warning symbol. A researcher opened it carefully. The video showed chaos. Alarms filled the laboratory. Scientists were running through corridors. Emergency systems were activating everywhere. Something had gone terribly wrong. The camera switched to a containment room. Lyra sat inside her pod, but this time she was crying. Large tears rolled down her face. Several scientists stood outside the chamber. Arguing, one of them looked terrified. "We can't continue." He shouted, "She's becoming self-aware." Another scientist shook his head. "That's impossible." The first scientist pointed toward Lyra. "Look at her. She understands what's happening." Then the recording suddenly ended. The room remained silent. Nobody spoke for several seconds. Finally, one researcher opened the final recovered file. The text appeared slowly. Many sections were damaged. But one sentence remained completely readable. All subjects terminated except Subject 0. Subject 0 escaped containment. The room became deathly quiet. Dozens of children gone. Only Lyra survived. Ethan felt anger building inside him. Not toward Lyra, toward the people responsible. The people who created this nightmare. One scientist finally broke the silence. "There is more." The screen changed again. A star map appeared. Several locations flashed red. One location stood out from the others. A hidden facility deep inside unexplored space. Beneath the coordinates appeared a simple message. "Project leadership remains active." Captain Ross frowned. "You mean they're still alive?" The scientist nodded slowly. "It appears so." A cold feeling spread through the room. The people who created Lyra, the people who experimented on children, the people who tried to build living weapons, were still out there, watching, waiting. Meanwhile, in the medical bay, Lyra sat alone. She had accidentally overheard parts of the conversation through an open communication channel. Enough to understand the truth, enough to understand where she came from. She stared at her reflection in a nearby screen. For a long time she said nothing. Then she touched the glowing lines beneath her skin. The strange marks she never understood, the marks that made everyone afraid. The marks that proved she was different. When Ethan finally entered the room, he found her sitting quietly beside the window. Looking at the stars, neither spoke for several moments. Then Lyra asked a question. A question so small that it almost broke his heart. "Was I made wrong?" Ethan froze. The child never looked away from the stars. She simply waited for an answer, for perhaps the most important answer of her life. Ethan slowly sat beside her. "No," he said. Lyra looked at him. Her silver eyes filled with uncertainty. "But they made me a weapon." Ethan shook his head. "They tried to make you a weapon. There is a difference." For the first time that day, Lyra looked confused instead of sad. Ethan smiled gently. "A weapon doesn't cry when people get hurt. A weapon doesn't feel afraid. A weapon doesn't care about others. You do." The child stared at him silently, as if hearing those words for the first time. Then suddenly the ship's alarm system activated again. Every screen aboard the Iron Star flashed red. Captain Ross's voice echoed through the corridors. Emergency alert. Multiple warp signatures detected. The entire crew froze. A moment later, scanners identified the incoming vessels. Not one ship, not two, but an entire fleet. And at the center of that fleet was a transmission meant for only one person. One name appeared on every screen aboard the ship, Subject 0. Nobody spoke. The bridge crew stared at the approaching fleet in disbelief. More ships continued appearing from warp space. Large warships, attack cruisers, carrier vessels. Enough firepower to destroy an entire colony. Captain Ross felt a chill run through his body. No military force would send a fleet this large to recover a simple experiment. Only one conclusion made sense. The people behind Project Ascension were terrified of losing Lyra. And terrified people often did dangerous things. Inside the medical bay, Lyra stood frozen in front of a monitor. The glowing message reflected in her silver eyes. For several seconds she said nothing. Then she quietly looked down at the floor. Ethan noticed something strange. She was not afraid of the fleet. She was afraid of herself. The same fear had been growing since the day she woke inside the laboratory pod. The fear that everyone would eventually see her as a weapon. Just like her creators did. Just like the reports did. Just like the hunters did. Ethan walked beside her and switched off the screen. The room instantly became quieter. "You don't have to look at that," he said. Lyra remained silent. After a long moment she finally asked, "What if they're right?" Ethan frowned. "About what?" The girl slowly touched the glowing lines on her arm. "What if I am only a weapon?" The question hung heavily in the room. Ethan knew she wasn't asking about the fleet. She was asking about herself, about her purpose, about whether she deserved a place in the world. Before Ethan could answer, another voice spoke from the doorway. "You're not." Both turned. It was Captain Ross. Behind him stood several crew members, mechanics, pilots, medics, people who only days earlier had feared Lyra. Now they looked at her differently. One of the engineers stepped forward. "You saved my life during the attack." Another nodded. "You saved all of us." Lyra blinked in surprise. The medic smiled gently. "A weapon destroys people. You protected them." The little girl looked completely caught off guard. No laboratory report had prepared her for kindness. No scientist had ever taught her what acceptance felt like. For the first time since learning the truth, some of the sadness left her eyes. Meanwhile, on the bridge, the situation continued worsening. The fleet was closing the distance rapidly. Communication requests flooded the ship's systems. Every message came from the same organization. The creators, they wanted Lyra returned immediately. Captain Ross ignored every transmission. That only seemed to anger them further. Several enemy ships began moving into attack positions. The threat was obvious: surrender the girl, or face destruction. Hours passed. Tension spread through every deck of the Iron Star. Yet something unexpected happened during those hours. Instead of hiding in her room, Lyra began helping people. She assisted engineers repairing damaged systems. She carried supplies through the corridors. She even helped the medical staff care for injured crew members. Everywhere she went, people noticed the same thing. She never acted like a super weapon. She acted like a child trying to help. One elderly mechanic accidentally dropped a heavy toolbox. Before anyone could react, Lyra caught it effortlessly. The old mechanic laughed. "Thank you, kid." The simple words made her smile for nearly an hour. Later that evening, Ethan found her sitting in one of the observation lounges. The stars drifted silently outside the window. Lyra seemed lost in thought. "What are you thinking about?" Ethan asked. The girl looked toward the stars. "I don't remember much before the laboratory." Ethan sat beside her. "That's normal." She shook her head. "No, I think they took my memories away. The possibility made Ethan uncomfortable. After everything the creators had done, it seemed entirely possible. Then Lyra asked another question, a very small question, but one that carried enormous weight. Why do you stay? Ethan looked surprised. What do you mean? The girl lowered her gaze. Everyone says I'm dangerous. Everyone says bad things happen because of me. So why do you stay? For a moment, Ethan simply looked at her. Then he smiled. The answer came easily. Because your family. Lyra stared at him. The word seemed almost impossible to understand. Family. No scientist had ever used that word. No laboratory had ever taught its meaning. Family was something she had never possessed. Something she had never expected to have. A strange warmth filled her chest. A feeling she could not identify, but she liked it very much. At that exact moment, deep inside enemy space, another meeting was taking place. Several leaders of Project Ascension stood around a holographic table. Their faces were old, their eyes cold. One scientist pointed toward a hologram of Lyra. The emotional contamination is getting worse, another nodded. The human is responsible, a third scientist frowned. If this continues, Subject Zero may become impossible to control. Silence followed. Then the oldest scientist spoke. His voice carried absolute certainty. Then we remove the human, back aboard the Iron Star. Nobody heard those words. Nobody knew the decision had already been made. Late that night, Lyra finally fell asleep peacefully. For the first time since awakening, she dreamed of something beautiful. Not laboratories, not containment pods, not experiments. She dreamed of sitting with Ethan and the crew, laughing, eating together. Living like an ordinary child, but far beyond the ship. Dozens of enemy warships began charging their weapons. Attack formations shifted, targeting systems activated. And hidden among the fleet was something far worse than the hunters who had attacked before. Something specifically designed to kill one human. Because the creators had finally realized a terrifying truth. The greatest threat to Project Ascension was not Lyra's power. It was Ethan's love, and they intended to destroy it before it changed her forever. The next morning began with silence, an uneasy silence. The kind that made experienced spacers nervous. The fleet surrounding the Iron Star had stopped sending messages. No threats, no demands, no warnings, nothing. Captain Ross disliked that more than open hostility. People who planned to negotiate talked. People who planned to attack stayed quiet. On the bridge, long-range scanners tracked dozens of enemy vessels moving into new positions. The formation looked organized, deliberate, dangerous. Ross stared at the tactical display. Then his face darkened. They're preparing for war. Across the ship, emergency alerts sounded. Crew members rushed to their stations. Engineers reinforced critical systems. Medical teams prepared for casualties. Nobody expected victory. The Iron Star was a salvage vessel, not a battleship. Yet nobody talked about surrendering Lyra, not anymore. Something had changed during the past few days. The crew no longer saw Subject Zero. They saw Lyra. And that made all the difference. Meanwhile, Lyra stood beside one of the observation windows. The enemy fleet filled the darkness beyond the glass. Hundreds of weapon systems pointed toward her ship. An entire armada had crossed the galaxy for one child. The thought felt impossible. Ethan joined her quietly. Neither spoke for a moment. Then Lyra broke the silence. They won't stop, will they? Ethan shook his head. No. The girl lowered her gaze. Because of me. No. Ethan replied firmly. Because of what they chose to become. Lyra looked up, confused. Ethan pointed toward the fleet. Those people had a choice. They chose fear. They chose control. They chose cruelty. None of that is your fault. For a moment the girl said nothing. Then she nodded slowly. The words helped more than Ethan realized. Elsewhere aboard the ship, another crisis was unfolding. The recovered laboratory files had revealed something new. Something hidden deep inside Project Ascension's archives. A scientist rushed onto the bridge carrying a data tablet. His face was pale. Captain Ross immediately noticed. What happened? The scientist swallowed hard. We found the final phase of Subject Zero's design. The bridge became silent. Ross took the tablet. The report contained only a few lines, but those lines changed everything. If Subject Zero reaches full activation, power output cannot be predicted. Planetary destruction possible. Stellar destruction possible. Containment impossible. The bridge crew exchanged nervous looks. Even Ross struggled to process the words. Planetary destruction. Stellar destruction. The scientists who created Lyra had not built a weapon. They had built a catastrophe. Then another line appeared. One final warning. Full activation may result from severe emotional trauma. Ross slowly lowered the tablet. His stomach tightened. The enemy fleet was preparing to attack. And somewhere within that fleet were the people who understood exactly how dangerous this information was. Almost immediately, alarms erupted across the bridge. The attack had begun. Energy signatures surged across enemy ships. Weapon systems charged simultaneously. Then the first barrage launched. Bright streaks of light raced through space. Moments later, explosions slammed into the Iron Star. The ship shook violently. Crew members struggled to remain standing. Warning lights flashed everywhere. Hull breach on Deck 4. Shields collapsing. Engine damage reported. The battle had barely started, and already the ship was suffering. Outside, dozens of smaller enemy craft rushed forward. Fighter wings, boarding vessels, assault craft. The creators wanted Lyra back at any cost. Throughout the corridors, crew members fought desperately. Security teams defended key locations. Engineers sealed damaged compartments. Medics treated the wounded. Every deck became a battlefield. Then disaster struck. A direct hit tore through one side of the ship. The explosion ripped through several compartments. Emergency bulkheads slammed shut. Dozens of crew members were trapped, including Ethan. One moment he was helping evacuate civilians. The next he was thrown across a corridor by the blast. Pain shot through his shoulder. Smoke filled the air. Sparks rained from the ceiling. For several seconds he struggled to breathe. Far away, Lyra felt it immediately. A strange sensation rushed through her chest. Fear, pure fear. Not for herself, for Ethan. Without thinking, she ran. Crew members shouted after her, but she barely heard them. She followed the damaged corridors. Past injured workers, past emergency teams. Toward the section where Ethan had disappeared. Then she saw the destruction, collapsed walls, twisted metal, fire. And trapped beneath part of the wreckage was Ethan, barely conscious. Blood stained one side of his uniform. Lyra froze. The world seemed to stop. 1,000 memories flooded through her mind. Not laboratory memories, not experiments. New memories, eating together, learning words. Watching stars, hearing someone call her family. For the first time since waking from the containment pod, she realized something important. Ethan had become her father, not by blood, not by science, but by choice. And now he was dying. Something deep inside her reacted. The glowing lines beneath her skin brightened, then brightened more, the entire corridor filled with silver light. Nearby electronics exploded instantly. Metal walls began vibrating. Crew members stared in shock. Energy readings across the ship surged beyond anything previously recorded. On the bridge, alarms screamed. Scientists looked at their screens in horror. The numbers continued climbing, higher, higher, and higher. Captain Ross felt cold fear spread through him. He recognized the warning signs. The activation process had started, not because Lyra wanted power, not because she wanted revenge, but because she could not bear losing the person who loved her. Back in the ruined corridor, tears rolled down Lyra's face. "Ethan," she whispered. The silver light surrounding her became blinding. Space itself seemed to tremble. Across the enemy fleet, sensors detected the surge instantly. Every commander saw the same impossible readings. Every scientist recognized the same terrifying pattern. The oldest creator aboard the flagship slowly stood from his chair. His face drained of color. For the first time in years, genuine fear appeared in his eyes. Because the event they had always feared was finally happening. Subject Zero was reaching full activation. and nobody knew whether the next few minutes would save the galaxy or destroy it. Silver light flooded every corridor of the Iron Star. The ship trembled as waves of energy spread through its structure. Warning alarms screamed across every deck. Electronic systems failed one after another. Crew members shielded their eyes from the blinding glow. Nobody had ever seen power like this. Nobody except the scientists who had created Subject Zero. And even they had only predicted it on paper. Now it was real. Now it was happening. At the center of the ruined corridor stood Lyra. Tears rolled down her face. The silver markings across her skin shone brighter than stars. Around her, pieces of metal floated into the air. The floor cracked beneath her feet. Energy surged through the ship like a living storm, yet Lyra barely noticed. Her eyes remained fixed on Ethan. He was still trapped beneath the wreckage, still unconscious, still fighting to stay alive for a terrifying moment. Lyra felt something strange inside her mind. A voice, cold, powerful, ancient. The voice seemed to come from deep within her, the part of her creators had built, the weapon they had spent years creating. "Destroy them," the voice whispered. "Destroy everyone who threatens you." Images flashed before her eyes. Enemy fleets burning, worlds breaking apart. Entire civilizations falling before her power. The strength existed, she could feel it. One thought, one decision, and the enemy fleet would disappear forever. The creators had designed her for this exact purpose, to become unstoppable, to become feared, to become a weapon. For several seconds, the temptation was overwhelming. No more running, no more fear, no more people hunting her. Just power, unlimited power. Then another memory appeared. A simple memory, Ethan teaching her how to eat at a table. Another memory followed, the crew laughing with her. The old mechanic thanking her for helping him. Captain Ross calling her part of the crew. The medic smiling at her. Family. The word echoed inside her mind. Family. Something the laboratory could never create. Something stronger than fear. Something stronger than power. Slowly, Lyra wiped away her tears. The cold voice continued whispering. But now it sounded weaker, far weaker. Because another voice had become stronger, Ethan's. The human who had never looked at her and seen a weapon. The human who had only seen a child. Suddenly Lyra made her choice, and everything changed. The violent energy storm surrounding her became calm. The silver light stopped growing. Instead of exploding outward, the energy began flowing inward. Controlled, focused, stable, across the ship. Stunned scientists watched their monitors. The impossible readings were falling. Not because the power was disappearing, because Lyra was controlling it. Something the creators believed impossible. On the enemy flagship, panic spread through the command center. The old scientists stared at their sensors in disbelief. How is she doing that? One demanded. She shouldn't be capable of controlling full activation. Another scientist looked horrified. Then he understood. It wasn't the power we misunderstood. The others turned toward him. His voice shook slightly. It was her humanity. At that moment, Lyra raised one glowing hand. A pulse of silver light spread through space. Unlike the violent shockwave from before, this one felt peaceful. Controlled, precise, the pulse crossed the battlefield in seconds. Then something impossible happened. Every weapon system aboard the enemy fleet shut down. Every targeting computer failed. Every attack system became completely useless. The armada that had threatened entire star systems suddenly found itself powerless. Not destroyed, disarmed. The bridge of the Iron Star fell silent. Nobody understood what they were seeing. Captain Ross stared at the tactical display. The enemy ships remained intact, yet none could fight. Lyra had defeated them without killing anyone, without becoming the monster her creators expected. Back in the damaged corridor, Ethan slowly regained consciousness. His vision was blurry, his body hurt, but the first thing he saw was Lyra kneeling beside him. The silver glow around her had softened into a gentle light. For a moment neither spoke, then Ethan managed a weak smile. "You okay, kid?" Fresh tears filled Lyra's eyes. This time they were tears of relief. She nodded quickly. Yes, Ethan noticed the floating metal, the glowing air, the strange calm surrounding her. "You did it, didn't you?" Lyra looked down. I almost didn't. Ethan understood immediately. He knew exactly what she meant. Carefully, despite the pain, he reached out and placed a hand on her shoulder. But you did. Those 3 words meant more to Lyra than anyone realized. Hours later, the battle officially ended. The enemy fleet surrendered. Many of the scientists responsible for Project Ascension were arrested. Their laboratories were discovered and shut down. The surviving records were destroyed. And for the first time in decades, the nightmare they had created finally came to an end. Months passed, then years. The story of Subject Zero spread across the galaxy. At first people told it as a warning. Later they told it as a miracle. The child created to become the ultimate weapon had chosen another path. A better path. As Lyra grew older, she used her abilities to protect colonies, rescue ships, and help those who could not defend themselves. World after world came to know her name, not as Subject Zero, not as a weapon, but as a guardian, a symbol of hope. One day, many years later, a young reporter asked her a question during a public interview. Thousands of people watched the broadcast across the galaxy. The reporter smiled nervously. Everyone says you're the most powerful being alive. What is the secret behind your strength? The crowd waited for her answer. Lyra smiled softly. Then she looked toward the front row. An older Ethan sat there, his hair now touched with gray, but his smile remained exactly the same. Without hesitation, Lyra pointed toward him. The audience looked confused. The reporter blinked. You mean him? Lyra nodded. Yes. The reporter waited for more. Lyra's smile widened. The galaxy created the perfect weapon. She paused briefly, then looked at Ethan once more. But one human taught her how to become a daughter. For a moment the entire hall became silent. Then applause erupted everywhere and among the stars. The story of a frightened alien child and the human who chose to love her became a legend that would never be forgotten.